Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of our podcast, She Said What, where we discuss the modern landscape for women. So, if any of you personally know me, you know that I am obsessed with youth scandals and business frauds. I low-key have too much free time. And one of the most recent and biggest scandals has been the insane rise and fall of Theranos.
Oh my god, Inika, I feel like obsessed might be a bit of an understatement because I'm telling you, I think like the second or the third conversation I had with you when I joined the school was literally about Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos.
Yeah, I mean, but it isn't for like no reason. Have you heard about it? It's huge. Okay, basically, for those of you who don't know what it is, Theranos was a huge health technology company and it went from being valued at over $10 billion to literally nothing in less than a year. And I don't know about you, but I find that pretty interesting.
Okay, guys, I honestly don't know anything about Theranos or Elizabeth Holmes, so let's just dive right in.
Okay, so I'm going to start. Let's just start from back in the day, from the very, very beginning, right? So Elizabeth Holmes was born in Washington, D.C., and actually her dad, his name was Christian Holmes. He was the vice president at Enron. And guys, if you don't know what Enron is, it's actually quite interesting because Enron was a huge, huge scandal. So Enron is basically an American like energy commodities company. And even though we think that Theranos is a huge scandal on its own, Enron was possibly double of what that was. That's quite interesting because whatever like scandalous characteristics, I guess, that her father possessed sort of just flourished in Elizabeth Holmes' character herself. So like father, like daughter, you know. After that, I mean, if you just look at whatever Elizabeth Holmes has done, like in her childhood or whatever, there's even one story about like one time she was playing Monopoly with her like cousins or something, and then she lost the Monopoly game, and then she like slammed an entire window or something. And that just goes to show like how competitive she was. And this like entire competitive nature of hers sort of just translated into this entire Theranos thing and how big she wanted to take it.
I feel that things that you go through in your childhood like massively influence how you are as a person when you grow up, right? And like I feel like her competitive nature has like carried on with her. So it's good to be competitive, but again, there's like a limit to everything, right? So sometimes when you're like too competitive, the smallest mistakes it starts affecting you. It starts affecting your mental health, it just gets too much. So it's like she kind of had this obsession with like winning all the time, which is like always like it's been throughout her life, you know.
Okay, so what was the next step? After her childhood, what happened?
So basically, she went to Stanford. There, I think she came up with the idea for Theranos. Basically, what she wanted to do was take like very little blood. So her idea was that you just prick your finger and a drop of blood comes out, and you can perform hundreds of blood tests with that one drop of blood rather than taking like a whole vial of blood as they usually do.
Yeah, no, but what's interesting is that like okay, so she went to Stanford. Obviously, like she's a super competitive person, as Krisha was just saying, right? But like the thing is, like nearly every Silicon Valley success, I want to say, she dropped out of Stanford.
Wait, she dropped out? Oh my god, so many of these like people who make it big in the Silicon Valley, they end up dropping out. I mean, talk about like Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates himself, Steve Jobs. Maybe she was trying to like emulate them in some way, maybe she thought that by dropping out she could be as successful as them in some way.
See, but again, I feel like there are two sides to it because like dropping out cannot vouch for your success, you know what I mean? Like there are trends obviously, but like if you have a degree, you have like this safety that you're gonna get a job, you're gonna be fine, okay? But like the risk involved in just dropping out, it's so high because like things are so unpredictable, and she took that risk, which is like quite impressive, honestly.
Yeah, I feel like one of the like predominant reasons why she did it, it's become like a quite like a common trend, I guess, like amongst like these business people, right? Like Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs specifically. I mean, we'll get into that later, but I feel like Elizabeth Holmes really, really wanted to like emulate your typical like Silicon Valley success, you know?
And I mean, that does make sense. As you said, Steve Jobs, we'll get into it later. But I think with her, is there a lack of originality? I don't know. I don't want to say that. But she just has this like process of kind of not having very well thought out ideas. And she just copies a lot of people. I don't want to say that she has no originality because obviously she's more successful than I'll ever be. True. But anyway, she did a lot of things that kind of led to her success. And not all of them were ethical. So she started Theranos, like the company itself. This idea was formed long before, but then the company itself was started in 2003. And that was when she got her first $1 million investment, which is a huge thing. Like the very first investment that you have in like a new form company is $1 million. That's pretty big, guys. And by 2004, the company was worth like $6.99 million, which is just wow. But also, she didn't really get the money by herself. Like she didn't go to people she didn't know. As we mentioned, her dad was in Enron and he was a pretty big businessman. So she used her family's power, connections, and leveraged those to get the money.
Honestly, though, she sounds like a little bit of a strange character to me already. When you talked about her childhood, like I think Sanjana, someone was mentioning how she slammed a window just because she got a little like mad. And also talking about the investments, do you think like the connection would have helped her, but do you think there were like other things that played a role in it? Do you think she, was always like a fair person while coming up with those investments? Did she give, correct numbers? Because when you talk about a lot of these, when you're trying to pitch an idea and trying to get money, a lot of times that people tend to not be honest about, their facts and figures. Was Elizabeth like that, or was she like, honest?
See, I feel like, you need money to like for a startup especially. And I feel like sometimes when you need money, you go to like really, really, you go to lengths to get it, right?
Here's the thing. When is like lying too much? Like what is the point where it becomes too much?
Your foundation cannot be built on a lie. That's when you're going too far.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like the thing is how much is too much, right? But I feel like Elizabeth Holmes didn't really have those like set boundaries. And I feel like even though she didn't have those set boundaries, she still managed to like grow Theranos to like quite a big thing, right? Like after, like Inika said, like she got like what $6.9 million within like the first like few years of her starting a business, even though she literally had no product, right? Like that's really, really impressive. But like she grew it to such an extent that like, Walgreens, right, guys?
Yeah.
Literally, like she pitched it to Walgreens, and then Walgreens like started Theranos booths in their stores. And not just like Walgreens, like there were a lot of like other like companies, like huge like pharmaceuticals as well, that like really, really wanted what Elizabeth Holmes had to offer.
Exactly. And Theranos was a huge company. Like I keep saying this, but you guys, I don't think you understand. Because within 7 years, like by 2010, it was literally valued at $1 billion. And the like really, really interesting part is that it didn't announce itself to the public. Like it didn't make a website. It didn't really present itself in the media and in the press till 2013, which was 3 years after it was valued at 1 billion. It was just kind of like an underground operation focusing mostly on research.
And I think she was kind of young, right? Like you said that she just dropped out of Stanford and things. So like to achieve so much, and 6.9, how much of a like $1 million she got and things like that just sounds kind of like crazy to me. That how would someone be able to like achieve that? It's really quite a feat. But did she have any like mentors and things? Was there anyone she looked up to, or like how did she get to that? I'm really confused.
I mentioned this earlier, and I know I built a lot of suspense with that preliminary statement of mine, but she really, really like idolized Steve Jobs. Like we say that we're obsessed with like a lot of people, right? Like I say I'm obsessed with like Shawn Mendes or whatever, but this lady was obsessed with Steve Jobs to like a whole nother level only. Like if you look at it in all of her like presentations or whatever, whenever she's pitching Theranos, all of that, she made it a point to wear like a black turtleneck, which like is literally Steve Jobs' like iconic outfit, right? She wore like black turtlenecks all the time, and then literally in her like poses for like the pictures advertising Theranos and whatever, she literally was holding like the like small little pill of blood or whatever and staring at it. And if you look at it, Steve Jobs used that exact same pose when he was endorsing his Apple products. Even some of her products, like she named one of her like products like the 4S or something after the Apple product.
Not just that, right? Like I think it's just so many things. Like it doesn't just end there. So the one of her first board members, I think the second one actually, was this guy called Avid Tivanian, and he was Steve Jobs' right-hand man. And later on, like when she was actually designing her product, which was called the Edison, she poached a lot of designers from Apple to design the product. Like to go to the extent to do that, that just shows like the level of obsession. Like it isn't even inspiration at this point. It's just like outright obsession.
See, Inika, when you often, when you have an inspiration, you're like looking up to them and you try to be like them. So your actions are like subconsciously following their footsteps. You know what I mean? Like you don't even realize when you're doing something the way your inspiration is doing it. I mean, trust me, I've done that millions of times. But like, again, if this continues beyond a point, then there's nothing new. There's like no difference in people. There's a loss in individuality, as you were saying before. Like she's not original, you know what I mean?
My question though is, why did she feel the need to, copy Steve Jobs or whatever? Like, what was the reason behind that? What was she thinking? Did she maybe perhaps feel like this is about, women and stuff? Maybe she felt like the need to be perhaps more manly or something in some way. Maybe she felt that, being a woman, she may have faced kind of a disadvantage, and that's why maybe, like, perhaps one of the reasons. I'm not saying it is the reason. I'm just trying to understand her thought process, but maybe it could have been that she felt that she would make it further if she was able to, not just copy someone who's good, but maybe just the fact that he was a man could have played a role. I'm not saying it did again, but, I think these are some aspects that we need to talk about.
Yeah, no, like I completely agree with that. And like there have been so many like conspiracy theories about this. But basically, like if you look at Elizabeth Holmes, right, like any of her like interviews or whatever, if you look at it, her hair is always tied up and it's tied up super messy. And then her eyeliner is done, but that's also super messy. And it's alleged that like she was faking a baritone voice. Like if you look at her earlier interviews in like 2005 or whatever, she was speaking a few octaves higher than she ended up speaking at the peak of Theranos. So all of her like her behavioral things, those were all like more masculine. And I feel like to an extent she wanted to portray a more like masculine image, but like I'm not exactly sure why that would be. Like, is that because she feels that like females in the industry are disadvantaged? Is that because she just genuinely idolizes Steve Jobs and wants to emulate him in literally every way possible? Like, why do you guys think that is?
I mean, we can't really say that females in the industry aren't at a disadvantage, but let's not get into that in this episode. But it was a lot of things, right? Like she downplayed her sexuality so much. She covered herself up. I am no expert in makeup, but her eyeliner was nasty. And it was just so many things. But why did she do that?
So again, I feel it's very controversial because, I feel like women, especially her in her case, I think she wanted to be taken a little more seriously. Being a woman in the business industry, it is difficult to be heard. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I mean, I guess it did work because like Theranos grew like huge, right? Like Inika said, like it grew to $1 billion. Like that's massive. And $1 billion off of what? Like literally, she lied about how her product worked. She lied about the product working itself. Like that was bound to get outed at some point of time. And if you look at it, this is where the beginning of the end comes in, right? So basically, this man called John Carreyrou, who is basically an author for the Wall Street Journal, he started like a secret months long investigation of Theranos after a lot of people had like come out, like ex-employees and like other like people who initially worked in Theranos. Like a few of them started coming out of the company. They like quit and they started, slowly talk started building that Theranos was a complete scam. So this man started looking into it. He started doing his investigation. And then along with like all of this like information that he collected from all of these sources, all of these tips, he started basically creating an expose about Theranos.
And beginning of the end, very nice, very dark, love it, dramatic as hell. Anyway, at this point, Theranos was huge because at this point it wasn't even $1 billion, like it was literally $10 billion. But the FDA, what they did was they had only approved one of their products and authorized the legal use of one of their products. But then after the expose came out, let's say, they were like, none of it is cleared, like all of it is a scam. And we haven't really validated the use of any of it. And now that's so much happened. Like the Walgreens deal fell through, another Safeway deal fell through, and Theranos had partnered with this company called Blue Cross, which was a really big insurance provider, and that also fell through. Everything, just as Sanj said, it was really the beginning of the end.
Oh my God, guys, this sounds crazy to me. I mean, Inika, when you first talked about, when you introduced the topic and you were talking about how she went from $1 billion to like nothing, I didn't believe you, but like, this is madness. I mean, this lady, I don't want to sound rude because like, honestly, like she made bank and we're never going to get to her status. Let's be honest here. But like, she sounds like she was a little bit of a psychopath. I mean, it sounds like she went to too much of an extreme. Risk taking and overconfidence and things are needed when you're trying to, build a business and things. But at which point is it too much?
Yeah, no, Risha, you talked about like her being confident and everything, but her confidence was really also like taken to the next level. Okay, so she went on this episode of Mad Money, and basically this was, I want to say, like the day after this Wall Street Journal article was released. She went on that show and she literally bluffed. She bold-faced lied to the entire audience and said that this is what happens when you work to change things. And she said, I quote, "First they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world." So she really also, like, she lied to the extent that she convinced literally every single person that this expose was just insanity, like it was all lies. How was she able to bluff so confidently?
Wow, this is, confidence when you're building a business is desirable, but like equally important is competence. You need to know where the limits are. You need to be logical and smart and be rational about what you're doing. You can't ever interchange the two. You have to have a balance. And I mean, clearly in her case, it didn't necessarily at the end work out.
Exactly. Like, and I think like we're talking about it like she had something and she made it seem bigger than it was. But you guys, I don't think you're understanding. Like, there was no product. It didn't work. She just made it like into a big thing. She spoke like such big talk. She raised $10 billion with literally no basis. Like, there was no foundation to her business. Everything was a lie. And this legend, like, she has the like audacity, the guts to literally go on stage and say that every single one of you is wrong. I am right, but she didn't have a product. That is so funny to me.
Exactly. I mean, I have no idea because, like, the way she bluffed and she managed to keep this under the bed for so long. I mean, it's still like, it's so weird, yet so makes me think so much because I wish I had a little bit of that, honestly.
Persuasion skills.
I'm finding this hilarious. Like you're telling me she had nothing. She started from nothing and still she made up like $1 billion from all everything based on a lie. Like I can't even comprehend this.
Yeah, no, and like we think like these kind of things like only happen in like stories or movies or things like that, right? Like when it actually happens in real life, then we find it so like funny because it seems like way too scandalous to be true, right? Like whoa. But then obviously like all of these lies eventually cause like a complete downfall. And it wasn't sold, there was no buyer, it was valued absolutely nothing. And obviously Theranos had to shut down then.
Okay. So Sunny Balwani, he is another really important player in the story that I want to bring up. So he was, I think, the COO of Theranos, and him and Elizabeth Holmes are like the two main people who've kind of been blamed for this whole big mess. Like, obviously, there's a lot of other minor characters, but like, if you hear two names related to the scandal, it's these two. And he was married actually, and him and Elizabeth Holmes were having an affair, which I want to like come back to the point where I said that she like downplayed her sexuality, acted really masculine to get where she is. Maybe not get where she is. Maybe that was one of the things that helped her. But like this also kind of like contradicts that. So like, did her wearing turtlenecks and wearing really bad eyeliner actually make a difference? Because at the end, she did what she did.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing though. Like, so there was Sunny Balwani, obviously, who was involved in not just involved in committing fraud, but also like romantically involved with Elizabeth Holmes. But like in addition to that, there are like so many other people, right? And she had such like an illustrious board of directors and everything, but still the company failed, right? Like obviously it's because of her lies, but I think there are like a lot of other factors that we should probably discuss. So where do you guys think it went wrong? Like really?
See, I think they honestly overplayed this whole thing about, fake it till you make it, because it's considered to be Silicon Valley's rule number one before you start any startup, okay? And like this concept, if not used properly, can lead to a business completely shattering. I mean, some of the employees, after, the business shattered, they're still in trauma. There's one of them actually committed suicide. I mean, this is the effect that it has on the employees. This is massive.
Exactly. And I think in general, like employees are just such an integral part of the business, because the whistleblower at the end, like the person who tipped off John Carreyrou, he was someone who worked in the company. All of their employees were so dissatisfied. And at the end, they were the ones who reported the company. So all of this just goes to show that like the people at the top can do whatever they want. But like if the workers aren't satisfied, everything is going to go to hell.
Yeah, speaking of how, she kind of ran a company, you said she was similar to Steve Jobs. And I know that Steve Jobs, for example, was really secretive about what he did. And he made it very clear that he was, always going to be the final decision maker in terms of what's going to happen. He don't tell his employees many things. And so actually even he was kind of resented in some ways in the office setting. And I think Elizabeth Holmes, if I'm not wrong, was the same. Like she was very like, maybe this is related to her childhood and how she's always been really stubborn, but it's always like Theranos is her baby. She's the one who's made it, and she's the one who wanted to carry out all final decisions. Everything was going to be in her hands, and that has negatives and positives. You want to have a company which is, I like, ideally you should have a company which is open and there's a lot of trust with the employees and things. But in her case, maybe that's not what happened, because obviously if you have so many scandals, if you're lying so much, then like it's kind of loose ends. So maybe it was like a way of her to kind of tie off loose ends.
Yeah, no, if you look at it, right, like Steve Jobs and her, like, right, like if we compare them, obviously Steve Jobs was secretive and that did cause like some of his employees to like resent him a little bit. But Elizabeth Holmes was a whole nother level only. Like, it was borderline creepy. Like, she would just sit in the office and like she would be the first person to come, the last person to leave. She would just sit there like in the dark. Like, that's so creepy. And like, if you look at like her interviews or whatever, the way she talks to people, she has like these ice blue eyes that she just stares at people with. She does not blink. She talks in a very like deep baritone voice. And it's honestly like, when I first watched the Theranos advertisement or like clip or whatever, I literally got chills. Like, I kid you not. So obviously with those kind of communication skills, if you're pitching to investors, I feel like low-key, like the vibe that you're giving off will also persuade them a little bit, because like it's so like creepy. Like, how can they just like stand up to that, you know?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Make a horror movie starring Elizabeth Holmes, everyone will get nightmares. But I don't know if we got into like actually the biology of Biden book, but what happened was, because you normally take blood out from a vein, right? But then her thing was that you take blood out from your finger. So you prick your finger like you do for like diabetes or something, and then you take the blood from that. But what goes wrong is that the whole blood doesn't have a common concentration. And first of all, it isn't a lot of blood, so you have to dilute it anyway. But it doesn't have a common concentration, and then there's like a really like different concentration of molecules in the thing. So lipids, proteins, everything is all over the place. And like, so if you take multiple drops of blood from the finger, each of them can have different concentrations, and that'll just like distort the data, and you can just draw a lot of conclusions that aren't really valid, you know. So that was what went wrong. That is unnecessary science, but here you go.
Inika, wow, you take like one science, but it's paying off.
True.
Okay, but like, see, honestly, this was bound to happen because, like, for how long can you keep this a secret? You know what I mean? It had to come out someday. This had to come out.
Okay, wow. So we've gone over the entire story from the start to the end, and it seems as though it wasn't necessarily just one factor that led to her downfall. It was a lot of things. I think the primary thing that we have established though is the whole, as we spoke about, the whole fake it to make it kind of culture that is, happening in all these startups and things.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree. And like, I mean, even if you look at it like right now, right? Like, so she got convicted, obviously, and then both like her and Sunny Balwani, both of them pled not guilty. But like, if you look at her like court tapes and everything, she's still lying like so confidently. Like, it baffles me, honestly. Like, I want to be persuasive, obviously, when I enter the business world, but this is like too much, you know? And okay, honestly, I feel that like, I am very passionate about the subject. I'm sure the four of us are very, very passionate about it, as we can see. But I think we should just end it right here before our lovely audience gets too bored, you know?
Guys, if you're watching this on YouTube or Instagram, let us know your thoughts in the comment section below.
If you're listening to this on Spotify, message us on any of our social media platforms. We'll be happy to know what you think about it.
Yeah, Senj, as you said last time, keep vibing.
I'm not even